Good afternoon or good midday. Thank you for joining me for potentially your lunch break today, October 21st. And we're keeping with the theme of this season, and maybe a little bit you may hear from the frog in my voice that I'm also experiencing the change in seasons here. And so the topic is fall into healthy habits, seasonal nutrition for energy and immunity. And I wanted to mention this, I think I'll mention it again later. There are a few items that I discuss, such as some recipes or some lists that, while I don't have an easy way to send them as a download to you specifically, if they're of interest to you, let myself or the Premier Weight Loss staff know, and we'll be happy to send those your way. So let's get this started. Again, the weekly mantra is to remember that it's the quality of your calories that matters. And hopefully we can seek out some good high quality calories when we're changing into seasons and getting different types of foods that correspond with those seasons. What we're going to be covering broadly is some nutrition challenges that you might approach with the changing of the seasons. I thought this was an interesting topic because it doesn't really come to mind very easily on the surface. Many of us think, big deal, I'm going to eat the same, but there are some challenges that might show up. Also, I wanted to focus specifically on some immune supporting foods, as well as some energy supporting foods. And to be clear on energy, I don't necessarily mean it's going to get you jumping out of your seat and running marathons or anything like that, but it's still some way to help prolong some energy, especially when the daylight times are a little bit shorter. I also list out some tips and tricks for some success, and since I've enjoyed making some weekly challenges, those will be at the end as well to see what maybe you would like to implement. As always, I want to make sure that you're welcome to ask questions at any time, but I always like to leave time at the end as well. So feel free to hit that question button in your screen. And if you have any questions that come up about this topic or others, feel free to let me know. Firstly, let's talk about the challenges that may happen when we see a change in seasons. So some of the nutritionally related challenges, one that I know sort of stood out to me especially is when we see these shorter days. For myself, I do feel like it's time to turn it in early. Once the sun sets, I'm not really interested in being up late or eating later in the evening. And so I think there is this extra sleepiness. I write laziness because I think sometimes we want to assign that to ourselves when we see that it's 6:30, we're already feeling like we don't want to do a whole lot more. And then instead of just recognizing that the lack of daylight generally makes most of us tired, we might say that we're lazy, but that's not really what that is. Also, this is cold and flu season, and that can also be nutritionally challenging. Many people don't have much of an appetite or they are eating less, but other people are concerned about what they can do to help maximize their immunity, their immune system, to try and at least prevent getting sick or not have any severe illnesses if it can be helped. And finally, with the shorter days, there may be some mood changes, lack of sunlight. There are people who report having seasonal affective disorder, and that may also impact our appetites to some degree. So because of all that, we know that GLP-1 medications can add an extra layer to those challenges because we've already got some appetite effects from GLP-1 medications. That's something that many of us want to have, but then this can sort of layer it on in unexpected ways. So to explain those layering on, we were already talking about how GLP-1 medications can cause a decreased appetite, which is expected, that increased feeling of fullness. And for some people, especially early on, but for others, it continues it's an ongoing process. It's that there is some nausea or some even taste changes that may be experienced when taking these medicines. So because of you're already experiencing those potentially with these medications, and now with the shorter days and possibly the lack of desire to put forth the effort to prepare meals, is it possible that we may be skipping some meals because we're feeling sleepy or lazy and would rather just not have dinner at all? Or are we possibly falling short on protein in these? Protein can already be a challenge as it is. And now, if maybe we're not eating quite as much, that could be happening more often. And this is sort of the third point I mentioned here at the underneath this topic was about comfort foods. Because as we know, comfort foods, I'll mention pumpkin pie, which comes around Thanksgiving, but maybe some seasonal comfort foods. For others, it might be the pumpkin spice latte, which might be a really good example right now. First of all, we know that pumpkin spice latte is not really ideal to meet the nutrition goals. It can be quite high in sugar. But then maybe you were trying to treat yourself because that is allowed. What if it doesn't taste the same? That can also be a very disappointing situation and a bit of a challenge there. And finally, with the shorter days, I talk here at the bottom, if you're not already taking vitamin D, it may be needed during these shorter days and lower exposure to sunlight. So that may be something to discuss with your provider as well. So since we were talking about immune support to start with, because this is cold and flu season, I wanted to provide you a list. So I have a list on the left here on some foods that you can focus on to help support your nutrition or support your immune system, excuse me. And just so you know, I do have this image available to you if you want to have a copy of it. Otherwise, feel free to screenshot it. I'd be happy to give it to you if you would like a physical copy to have. So, of course, there are some in-season fruits and vegetables because even though I always think about gardens closing up and foods not really being actively growing, there are in-season fruits and veggies, and they are full of immune-supporting nutrients. For example, vitamin C is still abundant. We know that citrus fruits can be coming into season. Also, apples, many people are going apple picking. But vitamin C is also in bell peppers. In fact, bell peppers tend to have more vitamin C than an orange. So if you are looking for vitamin C and not looking for a fruit option, that's a great choice to make. Also, zinc is something that you want to focus on many times for some immune support, and you can find those in many nuts and seeds. Vitamin A tends to be in your orange foods. So if you do like pumpkin pie, while it's still not necessarily the perfect choice, but pumpkin does have a very high vitamin A content, as well as sweet potatoes, and those in moderation would be acceptable. So here again on the left, I have listed out a variety of foods that are good for cold and flu season, and many of them are seasonal. And also, there are some year-round options to consider. So fish, I wouldn't say is necessarily seasonal. I know there are some seasons when certain fish are easier to be caught, but you can buy fish year-round, of course, and still have it be relatively fresh. And that is a good source of omega-3s. And it's not listed underneath this, but fermented foods, as you may know, if you've been to one of my other discussions on here, fermented foods are great for gut health, and your gut is a really important part of your immune system. So always want to support that as well. The next focus is on energy. And while I would love to say that I found the magic potion that can make you feel as though you have the same amount of energy of, say, a 10-year-old at recess, haven't found that quite yet. But I'm sure none of us are strangers to those midday crashes or just feeling really worn down before it's time to go to bed. And much of that can be due to having foods that don't really support a consistent blood glucose level. And so there are these peaks and valleys, and that can really affect you. And so you want to aim for those balanced meals and snacks. And ideally, these combinations of, if you're having carbohydrates, aim for the whole grains, aim to try and have some sort of protein, and as well have some healthy fats involved. And sometimes some of these are a little bit, they're a bit combined. As you know, quinoa has protein and it's also a pseudo grain. And then if you add a little bit of olive oil and maybe some chopped bell peppers, you've got a little quinoa salad that is a more balanced meal that's not going to make you have big blood or sugar spikes and then falls. Then the next thing here is to stay hydrated. Fatigue and dehydration frequently go hand in hand, and this is one that we can all use reminders on. Again, with GLP-1 medications, especially, sometimes that thirst response isn't quite as strong, so it's very good to and very important to stay mindful of that and think and remind yourself to stay hydrated throughout the day. Finally, when people talk about eating seasonally, I think some of us find ourselves asking, well, what's seasonal? And I know even though food is my life and food is my career, I couldn't necessarily say I'm an index of knowing when each food is in season. But thankfully, because I'm going to mention this on the right-hand side first, thankfully, the Indiana Farmers Market, they actually have a website where they list out each season and their foods that are associated with the season. And so I've got a copy of their fall list of foods, which are foods that you may also be able to find if you go to the farmers markets here in the Indiana area. So they list out their seasonal fruits, vegetables. They also have other here. So many times you'll find cut flowers available in some farmers markets. And I wanted to make sure you had this. And again, this is an item that can be found online, but if you would like a copy of it, I'd be happy to provide that. So feel free to ask the Premier Weight Loss staff and I can get that to you. But yes, when we're talking about eating seasonally, it's about the foods and fruits, vegetables, and other foods that are available naturally to this season that you don't have to necessarily have shipped from far away or have pre-frozen. Not that there's anything wrong with frozen, but there is something nice about knowing that you've had something seasonal, fresh, and usually close by. And variety does matter. So I wanted you to have this list to see what variety you can have and eat the colors of the rainbow, if you will, to try and maximize the nutritional benefits. And to help with variety, seeking out seasonal recipes can be very helpful. So like I'd mentioned earlier, I do have a packet, I believe it's about 6 recipes that are geared toward fall seasonal foods. And one example is their roasted vegetable salad with lentils. On its own, the protein content is okay, but you could then add maybe some grilled chicken or your protein of choice, and then you can really maximize the full nutritional benefit. So if that's of interest to you as well, I'm happy to share those recipes so you can see a little more about eating seasonally and maybe try some new things out. So talking about getting started, because I know that usually the fall vegetables for me don't particularly appeal necessarily because my immediate thought goes to squashes, but there's much more out there than that. But to get started, of course, is to plan ahead. And if you visit farmers markets, try and plan some meals around what you might get there. Many of the farmers markets, they will have a list of the vendors that are going to be there, what they offer, and if you can see a few things out there that appeal, then you can start to build from that. Also, regardless if you have a full meal in place or planned, it can be very easy to batch cook your proteins. Roasting protein or grilling or sauteing your chicken or whatever protein food you might choose, you can cook a whole bunch of it and have it ready to go. And You can also roast multiple vegetables ahead of time and have those ready as well. But also make sure that you can keep some old reliable snacks, because not every day is going to be a seasonal day. Not every day is going to be the farmer's market day. So just make sure that it's okay to have something that's familiar as well. Also, we talked about mindfulness recently, and so I'm expanding on that because doing a little bit of tracking, if you're making some efforts to eat a little differently, eat seasonally, then it might be good and worthwhile to see how you feel from making those changes. So if you keep a food journal, maybe make it a food and energy journal. Don't just write what you eat. Maybe write what you eat and how do you feel? Have you noticed any benefits? Maybe something that's not so beneficial. So check in with yourself and see how this is working for you. You can even write down if you're feeling frustrated. It can always be very helpful to sort of see how this process is working for you. And then finally, making a checklist. Sometimes it's too much to keep a journal, and I can respect that for many people. And so making a checklist of, did I have some protein today? Did I get my vegetables? Have I looked for healthy fats? How am I doing with hydration? Having those check marks, having that list, I know I'm very motivated by lists, so this can be very helpful potentially as well. Moving on to the weekly challenge. This is a new favorite thing that I've implemented for a few weeks now, is to get you started. Maybe for this next week, you want to take on a challenge to try that's related to seasonal eating. So I've got four options listed, and so pick one or add on if you feel like it of these next four to try out for the next week and beyond. So first and foremost, and probably my favorite, try something new from your fall produce. Have you tried acorn squash before? What about Brussels sprouts? That's a very divisive type of vegetable for many people. Or parsnips. Parsnips were a new one for me not too long ago, and they were shockingly delicious. I didn't know what to expect, and they exceeded my expectations. So pick one. And my top recommendation is to keep it simple. You can look for a recipe if you'd like, but sometimes keeping it simple is the best first start so you don't feel overwhelmed with a large cooking process. We don't want to spend 3 hours in the kitchen for a new vegetable or a new fruit or new anything that maybe we ultimately don't like. So pick one. And a simple way of preparation for most, but not all, is to roast with garlic and some olive oil, usually around 400 degrees until they're tender or to your liking for about 15 to 20 minutes. Double check that exact amount of time and that temperature, perhaps with a quick search, or again, ask the Premier Weight Loss staff to get in touch with me. I can find you a very specific temperature, but this is a good basis, a good start. Or if that's not of interest, let's think about preparing ahead. And so you can either make ahead or buy a nutrient-dense soup or stew. Because again, with these shortened days, maybe you're just not in the mood to cook. I know that I have evenings where I'm either too busy to cook or have been fooded out for the day and talking about food. And so having something easy to access is always helpful. And there are many nutrient-dense soups. Something like butternut squash soup or lentil soup. Those are very high in protein and quite a few nutrients. Or a good turkey and vegetable soup. Chilies are also very popular. I know they can be high in sodium, so just be careful if that's a concern for you, but these are very nutritionally packed. Chicken and noodle soup, not so much, although that can be a good comfort food. But see what types of soups or stews are either out there or ready to buy that are a little more nutritionally packed. And like I mentioned here, they can be nutrient packed, but also portions are flexible. If you're very, very hungry, you can eat more, or you can have smaller servings depending on how your appetite is treating you that day. Continuing on to the next two options, Maybe you can look into making an immune supporting snack. So for a couple examples, pumpkin seeds, which I think are delicious, especially when they're a bit roasted or toasted over a skillet. Add those plus some dried cranberries, although not craisins. Craisins are quite high in added sugar, so look for a low sugar option. Or you can do mixed unsalted nuts and perhaps a kiwi or other fruit, maybe an orange. And that has your vitamin C, that has some zinc, and you're supporting your immune system with a very quick and easy snack. And finally, I emphasized hydration, so I think it's always important. This is one where I find it easy to forget as well. Do a hydration check-in with yourself. Perhaps set an alarm if you have your phone and you like to work with alarms. Remind yourself throughout the day, maybe every couple of hours, have I drank enough? If you don't have one of those water bottles that has the reminder lines on there, or that checklist I mentioned earlier, that could also be a good way to check in. If you have multiple boxes that you would have to put a check mark in every time you've had a certain amount of water, that might work for you. And water can be very boring for people, and so you want to find what works for you. Just so you know, herbal teas definitely count toward your total fluid intake. I know coffee technically can as well, but I would be careful. Maybe decaf I feel a little bit better about, just because caffeine does have a slight diuretic effect, although I know that does get debated. But herbal teas, if you like a ginger tea, I'm a big fan of mint tea, chamomile at night, that does count. So feel free to give yourself some credit for that fluid and making sure you're staying hydrated. So to summarize all of this, just know that the fall time, and of course the upcoming winter can bring some change to your nutritional needs. But feel free to use this time to take advantage of seasonal foods. They're practically designed to help with your immunity and also support your energy throughout the day. As I mentioned, I had that list from the Indiana Farmers Market, and feel free to use some provided lists to help yourself locate those seasonal foods. And again, if you want that list, I'd be happy to provide that to you. Also, use this time to try out some new recipes. It's time to maybe feel a little experimental. Look for one that seems good and keep it simple. There's no reason that you have to try and go on a multi-course adventure if you don't want to. And use the weekly challenges to get started. Those are some very simple challenges. Add one or more and see how that works for you. I'd be interested to know how it turns out. And so with this list of fall seasonal fruits and vegetables here for you to look at or take a screenshot, I also want to open this time up for any questions that you may have. So I'll wait here for a couple minutes and feel free to reach out. All right, well, with that, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you found some of this informative, and if you have any questions, like I mentioned, that you think of later, feel free to reach out to the Premier Weight Loss staff or myself. We will be happy to answer your questions, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.